What's good, y'all? Welcome back to a brand new video. Now today we're starting what I want to be as a nice tradition on this channel. Once a week, I want to do one of these long, extensive, thought out research videos about the NBA. We're starting with the first one here. Whether it be one of my favorite storylines or the story behind one of my favorite players, nonetheless, I want to do one of these videos where I can sit down, research basketball, and bring a video for y'all. And today we got our first one. We talk about the worst contract in every team's history. Now, I use history very lightly because in this video, I try to keep it relatively close in time. So on this list, you won't see players from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even not even really from the 90s. Because me and you, that was before our time, so we don't really get to grasp the magnitude of the signing and the time. So all of these are relatively close. I would say most of them are in the 2000s, so keep that in mind. You know what? I know this is just going to be a really long video, but let's just go over to the first one. In 2008, the 76ers got what they thought was going to be one of their biggest signings in franchise history as they went out to sign Elton Brand. Elton Brand went from the always sunny Los Angeles, where he had a year where he averaged 23 points per game, to the city of brotherly love, where he never went on to average over 14 points per game. Now, that doesn't sound too bad until you realize that they gave this guy a 5-year, $80 million contract. He struggled to stay healthy, and in the final year of that 5-year deal, the 76ers decide to amnesty him. Next, you got the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, in 2013, they went out to extend the center that they thought was going to be there for their future, Larry Sanders. 4-year, $44 million contract extension. But just 2 years into that contract extension, he took a step back away from basketball and he was balled out completely. Later, he admitted that the reason he stepped away from basketball was because of depression, anxiety, and a mood disorder. Now, recently, he did try to get a second chance at NBA life as he signed with the Cleveland Cavaliers, but just after a couple games, the Cleveland Cavaliers waived him. But he ain't got to worry too much because every year into the year 2022, he got a fat check worth $1.9 million coming from the Milwaukee Bucks. Next, the Chicago Bulls. During the hot 90s, the Chicago Bulls went on to win 6 championships with average to below average centers. Shout out to Luke Longley. And you know what? Jay-Z said it perfectly.
They nothing but beginners. Y'all in the game, but y'all can't ball like Chicago centers.
Now, the second they got a chance to bring in an accomplished center, they did exactly that. Ben Wallace, 4-year, $60 million contract. Now, Ben Wallace is a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year in Detroit. And when he came over to Chicago, he was not nearly the player that we thought we were going to get. When he went on to only average 3.5 points per game, 5.2 rebounds per game, and shortly after signing that deal, he was traded to Cleveland Cavaliers. In 2005, 20-year-old LeBron James was this close to bringing a team full of nobodies to the playoffs. So close that them and the number 8 seed had the same exact record, but that team had a winning record against the Cavs, which ultimately means that the Cavs don't make the playoffs. So in that offseason, the Cavs organization thought, we need to get LeBron a second option, and they went out to sign Larry Hughes. In the last year of his contract in Washington, Larry Hughes averaged an impressive 22 points per game, and that was enough for the Cleveland Cavaliers to give him a 5-year, $70 million contract. He averaged 15.5 points per game in his first season, then 14.9 in the second, 12.43 in his third, and he also shot a career-low 37% that year. Now, ultimately, the Cavs organization realized that, well, Larry Hughes wasn't really the guy for them, so they moved on. The Boston Celtics. Now, in recent years, the Boston Celtics have been really good when it comes to the contracts they give out, the trades they've done, so we're kind of nitpicking with this when we talk about Jermaine O'Neal. Now, in 2010, the Celtics signed a 31-year-old Jermaine O'Neal to a 2-year, $12 million contract. Now, the numbers of 2 years, $12 million don't seem like much, but when I tell you that he played a little under 50 games in those 2 years and only averaged 5 points per game, then you start to really realize that that may not be the best money spent. Los Angeles Clippers. Baron Davis had an incredible career. He led one of the only 8 seeds in NBA history to be the 1 seed in the series. Shout out to the We Believe Golden State Warriors. And after that, he continued to ball out. But once his contract was over in Golden State, the first team to give him a call was the Los Angeles Clippers. The Clippers and Baron Davis agreed to a 5-year, $65 million contract, and shortly after that, his production began to decrease. Now, just a year and a half into that large contract, the Clippers decided that they wanted to go a different direction, so they traded him to Cleveland. Now, this is where things get really interesting if you ask me. They traded Baron Davis and a first-round pick for Mo Williams and Jamario Moon. That first round pick, y'all. Do y'all know who that first round pick turned into?
With the first pick in the 2011 NBA Draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Kyrie Irving from Duke University.
It turned into Kyrie Irving. Yeah, that kind of hurts if you're a Clippers fan. Now, Baron Davis went to Cleveland, played about a season, then he was eventually waived. And that $65 million, whew, it's a bad contract. The Memphis Grizzlies, $94 million over 4 years for Chandler Parsons. Now, early in his career, he surprised a lot of people by being a second-round pick and actually contributing basically right off the bat. But in Memphis, he ain't getting the same love because he's not given the same production. It got really bad this season as the fans did this when he was shooting free throws.
Well, in the pinnacle effective advice to the game, Brevin, you talked about physicality. Grizzlies have not been as physical, and Chandler Parsons misses 2 free throws. And the crowd wants something positive to happen for Chandler, but
now if your fans don't rock with you, then there's really a problem. Now, I know Chandler Parsons is a player that can be productive, but the ultimate question is, can he stay healthy and how long can he stay healthy? And because of his health, the $94 million is looking worse and worse every night. Do you remember Speedy Claxton? Probably not, and there's a reason for that. He was a 6th man in New Orleans for a while, averaging about 13 points per game, and that was enough for the Atlanta Hawks to say, you know what, let's give this guy a nice contract. They signed him to a $25 million contract over 4 years. Now, ultimately, it turned into a bad contract because, like many people on this list, he could not stay healthy, and because of that, that's money badly spent. Miami Heat. In the summer of 2001, the Miami Heat had max contract money, and they was looking for somebody to give it to. They found their guy. Now, Grant wasn't bad. He averaged 15 points per game in his first year in Miami, and he continued to be pretty productive over his years. But he wasn't max contract money. And eventually, he was a part of one of the biggest deals in NBA history, where he was a part of the deal to bring Shaquille O'Neal to Miami. Brian Grant helping Miami win a championship in 2006 without even being there. The Charlotte Hornets. After going on to win Rookie of the Year, Emeka Okafor was looked at to be one of the next great big men in the league. So much so that the Charlotte Hornets went on to sign him to a 6-year, $72 million contract. Now, it's a hefty price for a player that you're just gonna trade away after a year. Now, after that 1 year they traded him away, he went to Washington and he was done. His NBA career was over until just now, where he's playing in New Orleans with Anthony Davis. It's wild. 4 years of no professional NBA to just come in and start for the Pelicans. What more can I say? It was a bad contract. The Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz are silently one of the best ran organizations in the NBA. They don't get a lot of love for it. So because of that, there are not a lot of bad contracts in their franchise history. So we are nitpicking with this one when we say Joe Johnson, ISO Joe. 2 years, $22 million contract. Now, he was already late in his career. We know Joe Johnson's age. This was just a contract given to him in 2016. He was already late in his career, and with a lot of wing players and Alec Burks, Rodney Hood at the time, people were questioning why they went on to sign an older wing player. Now, Joe Johnson went out there and hit some big shots in the postseason, so that $22 million contract he was guaranteed don't look too bad after you hit a game win in the playoffs. But nonetheless, here we are in 2018, and they just now getting rid of the money that he was guaranteed. The Sacramento Kings. Now, the Kings are a team that we always make fun of for being a badly ran organization. But if you look at their history, they don't really give out bad contracts, surprisingly. So we're giving it to George Hill. 3 years, $57 million contract. Now, luckily for the Kings, there was a team out there that was a little bit more dysfunctional than them, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they needed a point guard. So they took on the money that George Hill was guaranteed. Now, the reason I'm saying this is one of their worst contracts in history is because you had just drafted a guy, De'Aaron Fox, the point guard of your future, but then you bring in the guy that's guaranteed 3 years on your roster that plays the same position as the 20-year-old guy of your future. It didn't really make sense, and then it turned out to not really make sense a couple months into the season when George Hill wasn't playing well, and well, De'Aaron Fox kind of was. And now you got this guy not playing as many minutes and making some of the best bank on your team. New York Knicks. In the beginning of the 2016 free agency period, the New York Knicks agreed on a deal with Joakim Noah were 4 years, $72 million. Now, many fans understood at the time that this contract would eventually become one of the worst contracts in the NBA. Noah had played just 97 total games over the last 2 seasons, with his productivity and his athleticism declining along the way. Just a season and a half into the monstrous deal, Noah has played a little over 50 games total and averaged 5 points per game. Now we get to the point now where he spent a game into the G League, and right now, well, he's not even traveling with the team. A guy, 4 years, $72 million. The LA Lakers. In 2016, we had one of the best free agent pools in a long time. Kevin Durant, DeMar DeRozan, Bradley Beal, Andre Drummond, and just some of the names that were available to sign elsewhere if they wanted to. Now, the Lakers having money to sign a max player had Lakers fans really excited for free agency. Many photoshops of DeMar DeRozan in LA and Kevin Durant in LA, but moments after free agency started, we got a tweet from Woj that said, LA Lakers and Timofey Mozgov agreed to a 4-year, $64 million contract. Now from that, we got 2 things: angry fans and a lot of memes. Now, that was not the only major contract they gave out in 2016. They also signed Luol Deng to a major contract. But the reason I say the Timofey Mozgov deal is worse than the Luol Deng one, because in order to get rid of that Timofey Mozgov deal, they had to package in an asset. And that asset ended up being D'Angelo Russell. They had to trade D'Angelo Russell to get off the money that is Timofey Mozgov, the Orlando Magic. Now, this one is a little bit different because we're talking about a player that had a very productive NBA career, and that player is Rashard Lewis. Now, in his last year in Seattle, he averaged about 22 points per game, but he didn't like the direction the team was going. He thought that they were going to a rebuild, and he did not want to be around from that, so he asked the front office to basically get him into a sign and trade, and the sign and trade happened to be with the Orlando Magic. Now, he was guaranteed a 6-year, $118 million contract. Now, over his time in Orlando, he averaged 16.6 points per game, which is great. He had a great career there, helped them get all the way to a championship game, didn't win the series, but he helped them get there. But he was not the superstar that they thought they were paying for, and ultimately, that's why I'm saying that this contract wasn't the best. Dallas Mavericks. Raef LaFrentz would go down as one of the most underwhelming players in NBA history, being a high lottery pick, and well, he didn't really pan out. But in 2001, the Dallas Mavericks saw potential in him, and they decided to sign him to a 7-year, $70 million contract. The plan was for them to get a big man to help the super dominant Shaquille O'Neal, and that didn't really work out considering they also signed Eric Dampier, another center, to a similar contract just a year after LaFrentz was signed. So just a bad deal, and then they went on to trade him just a year into that 7 year. The Brooklyn Nets, the worst GM in NBA history, Billy King, went on to re-sign Gerald Wallace to a 4-year and $40 million contract, which at the time was one of the worst deals in the league. So bad that they, like many people on his list, had to trade him away just a couple years into the deal. Now, he was 29 years old and already starting to decline before they shipped him over to Boston in a deal that we may not want to talk about if you're a Brooklyn Nets fan. Denver Nuggets. In 2004, Kenyon Martin was an all-star. If you ask me, the perfect time to be an all-star is in your contract year, and he got teams to believe that he was amazing. The Denver Nuggets and the New Jersey Nets agreed on a sign and trade deal to send Kenyon Martin to Denver in exchange for 3 first-round picks. Now, in Denver, he signed a 7-year, $93 million contract. After this, he suffered multiple knee injuries that would prevent him from getting better than the days that he had in New Jersey. This one is a little bizarre for me because in 2000, the Indiana Pacers signed Austin Crowder to a 7-year, $51 million contract. Now, that may not sound like an extreme amount of money, but it is extreme when you realize that Austin struggled to even make the starting lineup. New Orleans Pelicans. In Sacramento, Peja Stojakovic made his living by being one of the best sharpshooters in the league. In his time there, well, he helped them compete. They had some of their best years in their franchise history with Peja Stojakovic in their starting lineup. But in 2006, he signed with the New Orleans Hornets to a 5-year, $64 million contract. Just 13 games into the season with his new team, he suffered a major back injury and he would never be the same after. Detroit Pistons. In Atlanta, Josh Smith thrived as being the second and sometimes third option to Joe Johnson and other people. But eventually, he wanted to be the guy. And that's when he went out to sign with the Detroit Pistons. 2013, Josh Smith and the Detroit Pistons agreed to a 4-year, $60 million contract. Now, this didn't really work out because Josh Smith struggled to gel well with Andre Drummond and Greg Monroe, and just after a couple years, he was playing overseas. It was from peaks to valleys real fast for Josh Smith. Toronto Raptors. Hedo Turkoglu was one of the original point forwards in the NBA, and he strived in that role with the Orlando Magic. But eventually, his time in Orlando came up and he found himself in Toronto signing a 5-year, $53 million contract. Now, Toronto, they had a pretty ball-dominant point guard in Jose Calderon, and because of that, Hedo Turkoglu didn't really get to play the same game he had played in Orlando. And because of that, just a year later, he was traded away. Houston Rockets. In 2016, free agency, the Houston Rockets and Ryan Anderson agreed to a 4-year, $80 million contract. Again, in 2016, a lot of people got paid as that salary cap went up, and Ryan Anderson was one of those guys. Now, he has been playing pretty solid for them over these last couple years, but, well, if you ask me, that's a pretty hefty price to pay for a specialist. San Antonio Spurs. Shout out to Stephen A. Smith for this one.
Rasho
Nestovic. Who, you ask? Exactly. Now, even though the Spurs are like the best ran organization in NBA history, they sometimes make mistakes, and this was their biggest one. Signed him to a 6-year, $42 million contract. Y'all know Pop loves his players from overseas, but this one didn't work out as they had to trade him just a year into that contract. Phoenix Suns. Penny Hardaway is one of the biggest what-if stories in NBA history. Not only was he exciting to watch, but he was a really productive NBA player, but a player that basically his prime was ended with injuries. But just to let you know how great of a player he was, he still got teams to go on and try to bring his career back, and one of those teams ended up being the Phoenix Suns. Now, they signed him to a 7-year, $87.7 million contract. And y'all know how things go for Penny's career. It just didn't ultimately play well. So because of that, it's one of the worst contracts, but again, one of the saddest stories. OKC Thunder. Can you explain to me how Cal Singler got a 5-year, $25 million contract? I don't think you can, and I can't explain it to you either, but it is their worst contract in recent history because Sam Presti has been a wizard behind the desk. Not on this one though, Sam. I gotta say, it's not a good contract. The Minnesota Timberwolves. For a few years, Nikola Pekovic was one of the better centers in the NBA, so it was no surprise when the Minnesota Timberwolves signed him to a 5-year, $60 million contract. Like many people on his list, injuries. Injuries really hurt his career as just a couple years after signing that deal, he's out of the league. He had to retire. Achilles injuries, knee injuries, foot injuries. He's been through it all, and it's caused him to end his career. So it's sad stories, but again, a bad contract. 2016, Evan Turner, 4-year, $70 million contract. Again, 2016, a lot of people got paid. Evan Turner got his bags. Now, the reason this contract is so bad is because of contracts like this and some of the other bad contracts in Portland, they're going to really struggle to help build a team around CJ and Damian Lillard. So yes, individually this contract is bad, but for the grand scheme of things, it's even worse. The Golden State Warriors. For a while, Andrews Beatrice was the man. In the last year of his rookie contract, he was averaging a double-double, so it was no surprise when the Golden State Warriors went out to extend him. They signed him to a 6-year, $54 million contract, but shortly after that, he struggled to stay healthy, and he was out of the league by the time he turned 28. It can happen this fast for a lot of people. Now, there are some conspiracies that because he was such a bad free throw shooter that hurt his confidence and he could not perform in game, that could be it. But ultimately, man, if a player can't stay healthy, they can't be productive. And that's another character on his list that fell to that. And last, and certainly not least, the Washington Wizards, Gilbert Arenas. Some people argue the worst contract in NBA history. Gil was good. He was really, really good. In 2008, Agent Zero signed a 6-year, $111 million contract. The year he was signed, he played a total of 13 games because of a knee injury, and the following year, he played just 2. Now, in 2010, he started to look like the Agent Zero that we had seen before, as he went on to average 22 points per game. But just a smooth 30 games into the season, this happened.
Both citing unidentified sources that say Wizards point guard Gilbert Arenas and teammate Javaris Crittenden allegedly drew guns on each other during a recent locker room argument over a gambling debt. The league, the team, and DC police already were investigating why Arenas brought guns into the Verizon Center last month.
So a whole year off because of a suspension, then he came back and he did not nearly look as good as the Gilbert Arenas we had seen in his prime. Then he gets traded to Orlando and then ultimately gets waived there just a year later. We love you, Gil. Not like we really do. And that's it. That is the worst contract in every team's recent NBA history. It was very fun one for me. Got to do a lot of research. I learned a lot of things just by doing this research, and that's always fun. I got a couple of these longer, extensive videos thought out, but if there is a specific topic or moment in NBA history you would love for me to talk about, appreciate it in the comment section below. Since this is one of my more extensive videos, I would appreciate it if you drop it a like. Y'all know I don't usually ask for likes, but let's see what you guys think about this one. All right. Thank y'all. Peace.